Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing just fine. I don't think I want to eat chicken for a while. How are you?
Yeah, not so bad. I think, yeah. But bacon's not been on the menu this week. Slightly put off. But we're starting a new thing. We're in inter-season specials. We've done other things in the past. We've done something like we did a whole Red Dwarf, we did Westworld, and classic Doctor Who. And it does seem like this is a bit of a mix because we've gone like British and American and British. This is a mixture of both now. So it started British, was then purchased by Netflix and had much more American influences. And so we'll see that, I think, across this. We're doing Black Mirror. And we're not even going to be skimping. This isn't like, oh, we're going to talk about a whole season. Like, each of these stories are so different. This is an anthology show. We're going to do everything. This is going to be a long one, but we are going to do every episode of Black Mirror individually. Now, these will be shorter episodes, but still, we will get into it. And we're going to start at the beginning, end at the end, including, hopefully, the latest season that will drop on Netflix. But before
By
we
the time
start,
this comes out.
yes, hopefully, by the time this comes out and we get to it. So, but before we start with the actual episodes, because we're going to be starting with the National Anthem, which was released in 4th of December, 2011. 4th December being my birthday. But I just want to talk about two things. Firstly, the title, Black Mirror, and what that means. And also sort of like one of the things I think that will be interesting is this is written by Charlie Brooker.
Mhm.
And then who's comes with a British sensibility, and then so it's interesting to sort of hear from your point of view, Julian, for how you came across this from an American point of view. But let's start there, because obviously my coming across this was on Channel 4. It was promoted quite heavily. The first episode, the National Anthem, was kind of a big deal. It was discussed in Parliament. It was on the headlines. It was quite important. So, a lot of people knew about this TV show. What about yourself? How did this come across in the States?
I don't think anyone I knew had ever heard of this until it was on Netflix. I'm sorry to say. I think that it was once it was on Netflix that it became the series that everybody had to see. And so it moved for the third season, and the third season came out, and the first two migrated over to Netflix, and then it was like, oh, you've really got to see this. This is amazing, and it has kind of continued that cachet to this day. I don't even know. I guess it just didn't register until it became an American thing.
Well, Netflix gives it that much, much larger audience. But this is the irony of all this, and this is often the case. We've talked about this with films like Battle Royale, which decry violence but then display awesome examples of violence for film. The Black Mirror of the title is supposed to be the offsetting of your device, your phone, your tablet. That is the Black Mirror. That's what Charlie Brooker was also referring to. So in those early days, this show was about the use of technology, and it grows into other science fiction and sort of satirical stories. But that Black Mirror is your laptop screen, your computer screen, your tablet screen, your phone screen. That's the Black Mirror that is looking back at you. And I think that plays out very heavily in these first 3 episodes of the first season. But the irony being, of course, this went to a streaming service, which is available on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, as well as your television. And so it's interesting how those sort of things play out. But the thing that he is kind of, and he does get to these sort of things, is kind of sort of, raging against is the thing that's actually funding him in the end.
Yeah, and we'll see some of the same ironies come out later in the show. Yeah, and I think that the thing that I hear most of all is complaints that more episodes don't come out faster. And this is also, if you want to talk British versus American thing, this is also a British versus American thing. We used to have 30 episodes of a show a year, right? We settled into 20. Now even the major networks tend to produce 10 or 12, which is more cable influenced. But obviously, like, the idea that you have to wait 4 years to get a batch of 5 episodes is intolerable to Americans. And perfectly normal for you guys.
Yeah. Oh no, this is the kind of thing. I mean, we're very much used to six episodes is a typical sort of series, as we would call it.
Yeah.
You think about Faulty Towers has only got 12 episodes, 13 episodes. That's 2 series, and you think, oh, like, things ran for years. You go, oh, this show ran from 1984 to 1994, and you go, oh my god, there must be like hundreds of episodes. You go, no, there's probably about 40, if that. So yeah, it's definitely a British versus American thing. I think we are kind of used to it, and I think the quality in this, the budget requires it, and I think that's just part and parcel. But I also think, like with Charlie Brooker, like, he's looking to write solid material. Like, it doesn't feel rushed, I think, is the point as well.
Yeah, and we have done the Twilight Zone, and have experience now thinking about a sort of sci-fi anthology series. Obviously, to do that kind of thing today, you do need more time. You do need to have more of a concern for quality than you would back in the 60s, right?
Yes.
Where this was just put up and it was a half-hour show, and you're lucky if it's rerun once. There's no real expectation of it doing much more than that. Now these things live forever. It's a very different world, and I think the expectation, this sort of quality versus quantity formula, is completely inverted, right? And that's good, right? Because quality is what matters now. It's better to have fewer things and more, despite the Americans' gripes, than it is to crank them out 60 style.
Yeah, but I also think that thing of leave them wanting more is probably a part of its appeal, isn't it? Like, getting some new episodes is somewhat special, so it's going to be received. It'll do well for Netflix, as it were. It was interesting that obviously we know it's now on Netflix. That's what season 6 is going to be. But this, it should be noted, started on Channel 4, which was known to be sort of like the rebel channel. At the time, to 2011, this was... Yeah, no, we had 5 channels at this point. Like, we had some satellite, Sky and everything, but terrestrial channels was 5. So 4 was known as the rebellious one. Channel 5 was known as the trashy one. That's sort of how it was. So yeah, but this was a real hit for them. Like, they were doing this kind of thing really in this period. Like, there was was it called Dead Set? They did like a zombie thing as well that sort of took the mickey out of their Big Brother, and couple of things like that. So,
I mean, probably it was the controversy over the show and how much attention it got that helped it get the Netflix special, or the Netflix buyout.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just so it's got some sort of pedigree in that sort of state. But anyway, let's jump in. We are going to talk about the first episode. We're starting at the beginning. The National Anthem, which aired on 4th December 2011. Better known as the one where the Prime Minister diddles a pig. We'll get to that. Sorry, but just in a nutshell, a young princess of the royal family is kidnapped, and I don't know what you call it, threat, ransom is put online using YouTube. A video of her saying that she will be returned safely if the Prime Minister, Michael Callow, basically fucks a pig on live television. Is in a nutshell. And then it basically follows up to the time in which he basically consummates the act. And it's sort of then revealed that she was released half an hour before the act started. And that sort of, it just follows that tension. So what are your first thoughts then, Julian, about this episode, the national anthem?
I think this is actually the weakest episode of the season.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Which is not fair, to look forward. But I think this is the most memorable. I mean, it's one that everybody remembers from the show, right?
Yeah.
You can see why, especially in Britain, you'd start with this for all the headlines and everything. But it's one idea, and it really is not science fiction at all. There's no real interesting idea here except what would the prime minister do in response to a terrorist demand, and kind of watching that play out over the course of 45 minutes. That's interesting. I don't really believe any of how it plays out. I'm really bothered by some of the assumptions it makes about how the system works and how the public thinks. And also how relationships work in the end. But at the end of the day, it's an entertaining 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's definitely I agree it's the weakest of the three. And I also can see why it was chosen to be the first one, because you say it's so memorable as a hook, isn't it? That's the point. As a marketing thing of like, this is what we're going to be showing you from the off. I think the thing is this doesn't have a great science fiction theme or hook, but it does get to very quickly that point of what I think Black Mirror is trying to get to as its crux, as its whole thing, is this idea of the dissemination of information and things. I mean, this includes a video being posted onto YouTube, and then it goes on about sort of social media trending and how people are perceived. I mean, that's one of the big things for the Prime Minister, is like how people will see him. And it's made quite clear that this isn't just about the vote. This is about being seen as, I don't know, a certain kind of man, and how opinions can change very, very quickly. So I don't know. It sort of has points, but I don't think it's. I don't think it's it almost feels like this was an initial idea that Brooker had, and then that was sort of like his starting point. And they were like, okay, well, it's an easy one to do. The budget's going to be kind of low for it. Let's do that one first. Almost like a pilot.
Yeah, I agree. And it has that kind of feel to it. It's just it has the thing that I like a lot, which is sort of one idea and then you follow that idea through, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You can kind of do that and get an excellent show. And often the things that we object most to in shows are that they don't really follow through on the repercussions and ramifications of their idea. This does. I just don't always buy all of those repercussions and ramifications. So it's kind of charming to see it, follow through almost in real time, right? Basically one day, as the government has to respond to this. But yeah, I don't know. It feels oddly underwhelming, right?
Yeah.
And I think so much of it is just the shocker element of it, right? Like when the PM gets in the room with the pig and is looking awkward to the camera and speaking awkwardly, you have that sense of like, I can't believe I'm watching this, that you're supposed to have,
Mm-hmm.
as somebody in the audience, in the fictional world too. And I think that works, but it seems like so much of the episode is based on that moment.
Yeah. The thing is, as well, is what it boils down to, and I think this is where I have one of the bigger problems of this episode is the princess is let out early, and then even his sort of deputy or his minister or whatever says, "Oh, they were making a statement." It's just a statement, and you go like, "Cool. What was the statement?" Like, it's just a humiliation. It's just a possibility. You go, "Okay, well, no demands were really met. No, it didn't seem, it's identified that the person that did it is an artist." I think that's sort of, obviously the heavy insinuation. So is this supposed to be an art piece? In which case, like, what is the purpose of it? Like, it's,
Yeah.
I don't want them
What's
to take
the
credit.
statement?
Yeah, what's the statement mean? Like, what is the point of it? And that's sort of what bothers me a little bit.
I like the idea that it's a performance art piece. I mean, it sort of reminds me of Jack Nicholson in Batman, of sort of, murder is performance art. You can kind of justify anything by saying it's somebody doing performance art. I kind of dig that in a way. But even there, there's so much that I don't buy. I don't buy that a prime minister would ever do this.
No.
I just don't buy that. That's not going to happen. And I think especially in Britain, which is, more repressed than we are, if that's humanly possible, about sexuality, right?
Yeah.
The last thing that a prime minister is going to do is have sex with a pig on live television.
Well, the thing is, and because you say about this follows through on the ramifications, and it sort of does for the personal bits and stuff, but it becomes unbelievable when, like, the Queen rings him and says, "We believe, we understand you will do whatever it takes to get Princess Sophie back, whatever, Princess Susanna back." And again, I'm like, this feels really contrived in a sense, because it's like that thing of going, okay, well, he's forced into a no-win position. But what it is again, it's that thing if you don't negotiate with terrorists. Well, all right, what's to say that the next one then is that, Princess Susanna is kidnapped, and it says, right, well, now the Queen has to, go on national television and be diddled by a dog. Like, how is it different? Like,
now that's one that I could stand behind. No, I know exactly what you mean. There's a reason why we don't negotiate with terrorists. And obviously, there is a total justification, to be able to say that. And I think that when it comes to terrorist threats and threats on the nation, and, whether it's knife attacks over there or, terrorist threats over here, the train, the plane bomber and, things like this, the public generally gives governments a wide berth in how they deal with it. And is generally very understanding, perhaps too much, including of basic errors that have been made by the government, errors in strategy, errors, of every sort, that we say, well, they were trying their best, right? I can't believe, first of all, I can't believe that, that it starts off only 25%. They have this instant polling. I guess that's part of the Black Mirror point, of how susceptible governments are to this. But I don't believe that once they discover this attempt to do a deep fake, that would swing the British population the exact other way. 75% would be in favor of. I mean, you would be irresponsible not to try to do a deep fake. I mean, how does the perpetrator know that? My objection to that ending of her being released 30 minutes ago is, correct me if I'm wrong, but she's found collapsed on Millennium Bridge. So, I mean, I've been on Millennium Bridge. I've walked Millennium Bridge. It's next to everything.
Yeah.
You can walk the length of it, in 10 minutes or something. I mean, why would where was she released that nobody found her for 30 minutes?
Well, this is and that thing, isn't it? It says, oh, well, they must have released him at the time when everybody was at somewhere watching
Mm.
you know, watching a screen to see this happen. So there was nobody about. All right, it's slightly different, but that we had the king's coronation here very recently. I can guarantee you, not everybody was sat at home. Like the streets were not empty. Like I was out and about for a start.
Right.
Like there would have still been people about, but not only would there have been people about, possibly a much smaller volume of people, but in a case like that, you would have an increased police presence out in the streets going, right, well, we don't know where she's going to be released, but we don't know what's going on. This could actually cause some disquiet because of the humiliation of this act. We need an increased police presence. So yeah, it all feels very silly at the end, in all honesty. But this comes to my other point about the person who gets kidnapped. And again, it's very British, but this Princess Susanna, they call her the People's Princess. So they're obviously playing on sort of like, Diana tropes, and we haven't really had anyone since that, but like, there's other young princesses involved, like Beatrice and Eugenie and a few others. Like, but the fact it's a royal, again, if this had been a regular girl, a young woman, but like a non-royal, just a normal woman, would that have been different? And that's where I'm sort of like, making it a royal feels like a cop-out.
In what way a cop-out? Because then you can get the queen call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's additional authoritarian pressure to follow through. And it feels that sort of thing of like, well, if anything, this would divide the British public, because there'd be a whole hell of a people going like, no, like we do not cow down to terrorists, and
right,
sod the royal family.
Yeah, which is basically my standpoint. I don't like, you can negotiate with terrorists, but I certainly don't like. I have very mixed views about even my government getting these hostages back. Where, including with Russia, it's clearly caused Russia to take additional hostages in real time. I mean, we're watching the stupidity of, negotiating with terrorists in real time. So, I mean, for me as a Yank watching this, the idea that this is this royal princess, this Duchess of whatever, first of all, that's kind of abstract to us, that's all sort of like, oh, right, those people exist still, right? Like that's something from medieval fairy tales. That's not, it's sort of like, oh yeah, there are these titles, but why would the government stop? She's basically a celebrity, right? She has no function. She's a celebrity. How is this different than kidnapping Julia Roberts or something?
Well, I think the difference is, although you say she's a celebrity, and that is the case, it's the fact that she's part of the institution, and she's a well-liked member of the institution, and that's important for the royal family. I don't care what they say, how it's perceived. Having a well-liked member of the royal family by the public is important, because other members of the royal family aren't liked by the public. So you need, for every Prince Andrew, you need a Prince William, or a Kate and Will's kind of thing. Like you need that, and I think that's the point. Is we have the royal, and I think even in the last 10 years, like this 2011, I think things have shifted even in the last decade. But I think at this point, we were coming up to. Don't forget, we were coming up to another jubilee at this point in release of this. So patriotic monarchist sentiment would have been a bit higher. This idea of the royal family being threatened would have been quite. Yeah, I think people would have been upset about it.
Yeah, I guess. And I can kind of understand that as an abstract, right? I mean, it's the same way that I can kind of understand, in a sci-fi setting, like, oh, everybody's concerned about Princess Leia, right? But it's abstract. It's not something that I understand, nor do I think at this point in my life I want to understand. Um, the most amazing thing you say about how having a member of the royal family being liked um, is a big deal and really matters, I guess, especially to them. It's amazing, given that fact, how thoroughly unlikable the British royal family manages to be at all times.
Oh yeah.
Um, I like, if for a group so concerned about PR, it's like, yeah, maybe spend a minute talking to PR experts and actually, changing your life from being disgusting people.
Yeah.
Um, I don't understand that, but I guess that's what happens when you have authoritarianism and people can do whatever they want. Some people are liked and listen more, and some people say, as you'd say, sod it.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of this, is that thing of the influence of the person being kidnapped. I mean, I think there's a more interesting story here if it had been a regular person.
Hmm.
A really sort of like, because there's this thing of having the authoritarian pressure is one thing, but it is just instead of Princess Susanna, it's just Susanna from Basingstoke, right? It's just some woman who's been kidnapped, and right, okay, well, how does he
Yeah.
handle that? Because that's when you sway opinion. Oh, he's actually willing to sacrifice one of the regular folk. Oh my God. He calls himself the Prime Minister of the people, but he's willing to sacrifice this poor woman who's got a family and kids and stuff. Like, that would have been more interesting.
Well, so I think that's fascinating. And, of course, that gets to the heart of, I think, one of the sort of incongruities or things that upset me about this episode, is that the victim is somebody who I don't understand why she's so beloved and
Mm.
why hell and earth is going to be moved. Heaven and earth is going to, that's a Freudian slip. Heaven and earth is going to be moved to rescue her. And as you say, if it were, I mean, let's say that it's a Muslim daughter
Mm.
from a impoverished area on the outskirts of London. We both know it's not even national news over
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. But I think that would start to make a much more interesting story. Looking at the diversity of Britain and stuff. It's this, like you say, a young Muslim girl that's been kidnapped and is under threat, and then in 2011 in particular, after sort of years of the war on terror and all that sort of thing, how would the British Prime Minister deal with that? I think that's more about public opinion, because then you can have this thing about, you'd have all the things of the entrenched racism of the country versus the fact that we don't want to see, a young woman hurt, or like, is he a man of the people? And I don't know, that feels way more looking at this thing of let's call it social media democracy in action would be a lot more I think cutting. But I mean, one of the things this does show as well is another thing of that I think this country is, we export quite heavily, is our press, and how vile our press and intrusive our press can be. We've had like at least 2 hacking scandals where known newspapers have hacked into people's phones, including the Royals. And in this, obviously, we have a newspaper. They are issued with a D notice, which we will cover in a second. They then choose, it's a voluntary D notice, but they eventually choose to ignore it, and then they follow things up. And in doing so, a journalist ends up sort of being at the site of a potential break in the case where the SAS are sort of going and gets herself shot. And again, it's one of those where maybe as I'm older, like when she gets shot, I think you're supposed to be like shocked, like, oh my God, this has happened. Now I'm like, yeah, sort of serves you right. It's your own fault. You were chasing the story and not taking yourself and others' safety into consideration. Kind of your own fault. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the press involvement?
Yeah, I it was cutting out there a little, so I'm
Okay.
not sure. I just heard, you were talking about how she gets shot, and then I heard,
Mm.
and when she gets, and then
So,
it just got.
okay. I mean, it says 29 minutes. When she gets shot, I
Mhm.
think it's supposed to come across as shocking to the audience. And I think when I watched it the first time around, you do sort of feel that a little bit. You go, oh my God. Now I'm more inclined to think it's your own fault.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, where it's sort of like, well, you broke into this incursion, this event, and now you're shot. I don't know. How do you feel like the press involvement in this?
Yeah, I think that it's very strange because I mean, of the things many things I probably don't understand about Britain, and life in England is what you're talking about. Because on the one hand, like, okay, so an American press would, there's no such thing as a D notice over here. The American press would never debate whether they're running this story or
Yeah.
not, right? I mean, if Joe Biden called, ABC and said, "Hold off on the story, please," um, you know, there are situations in which that would work in the midst of a military attack, right?
Yeah.
There are circumstances under which I think our press is very cautious, and doesn't show, say, the raw footage of school shootings and other things that they clearly have the right to do, but that they
Choose
are.
not to.
Yes, and in a very oddly, almost stiff upper lip sort of, repressed way that
Mm.
I find very irritating over here. But for the most part, the press would have run this story instantly if it were an American press. On the second hand, the press would never have gone in that building,
Yeah.
uh, and never have run away from the American military. Um, so it's very strange that, your version is both more compliant and subservient and also more illegal and obtrusive.
Yeah. We are very complicated. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, I mean, you mentioned like the D notice, and this is an quite a known thing, I think, really within the population, that we have these things that can be issued by the government that basically is like a bit of a press blackout. Yes, you have this thing, but you cannot talk about it. And this one in this situation is a voluntary one, but I believe they can have an enforced one that can actually result in charges and prosecution and all kinds of things. So yeah.
Yeah, they can. This is a system you guys still have. And I had to research this for Miracle Man. It was Miracle Man that first brought this to my attention. And when I looked this up, I thought, you're kidding me. Like, this cannot, this is something straight out of 1984 or something. Like, there's no way that the government can issue a notice and then there's a press blackout on something with criminal penalties. And that the press goes along with it. Like, what are you talking about? And this is a real thing. It's flabbergasting.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We are quite. Yet we will then literally use software to hack into celebrities' phones to read their emails and texts and then publish them. So,
But how is the same country that's known for a tabloid press, the likes of which America, with its muckraking journalism and its say anything and irresponsible spirit, could never dream of, um, just a level of tabloid schlock and disgusting stuff, has a culture of that. Also, it's like, oh well, we have this authoritarian D notice. Let's comply to it. It's very hard to get my mind around.
yeah, it depends on what day of the week it is as to what we do. I swear, I don't know. It is confusing. It's very strange. But yeah, that's how our press can be. I mean, it's we have had this where we will have exposés, like big stories that are breaking about very 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 important people or big companies or whatever. But then we also have people that sort of like leave a newspaper or retire from journalism to then openly talk about the stories that they weren't allowed to discuss and stuff. And you're like, oh wow, so there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, this is one thing that's very strange. And it's also true that legally, I believe you can't run stories about cases currently in process.
Yes. Well, you can, but like literally to say the case is being investigated. That's
right. So
that's
like
about
over
it.
here we have everything is transparent over here, right? By
Mm.
comparison, it's like you guys have these webs of things you can't talk about, and whether it's just nobody talked about what that host was doing on the BBC, or there's a D notice officially, or or not, or it's a case in progress. And
Yep.
over here it's like, well, Monica Lewinsky identified a blue spot on the right of the president's penis. Like, here's an artist depiction.
Yeah. Well, okay. Here's the other thing, and just to sort of to throw that in. So, in America, if you've ever watched a true crime documentary, you have footage of, there'll be someone taken to the dock in the orange jumpsuit and in cuffs, or you'll see the court case being played out. There's all this other stuff. We are not allowed in this country, so it's illegal to have photography or any video footage of a court case. Because it's considered, they might video or something that then is in private hands. So we still have what they call courtroom artists.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever look at British news, and it could be an absolutely sort of like high profile, massive court case, and instead of having video footage, you might have someone leaving the court. That's fine, but it'd be like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, right? So that's a good example, because obviously some of that took place in the London courts as well. When it was the American one, it was all over TikTok. It was on YouTube. It was everywhere. Video footage of he stood, my dog stood on a bee and all this other stuff. Over here, we were like, you'd hear Miss Heard took the stand today and stated this and this. And whilst the news reporter was saying this, there's like a chalk sketch of Amber Heard sat in a dock, and you are like, right. This feels so weirdly archaic that I know I will see this on video when it gets to the States.
We have the same thing, but it depends. We used to have the same thing, but we still have the same thing, and it depends whether on the laws of the state and whether that particular judge. In some cases, it's left to a judge's discretion, and there are cases where a judge will say, "There's, like obviously during the Trump arraignment, the judge decided to make that stuff private for what obviously to help Trump in that case, but." So, I mean, there are cases like that. But then also we have these segments on like John Oliver where, he'll say, oh, right. And because because you can't make fun of the monarchy by law, this entire segment will be replaced with a man jumping through a hula hoop for 10 minutes. And you'll say, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's not entirely true, that one, because obviously we rip into the royal family constantly, but there are laws of things you can't say and do and that sort of thing. There's a decorum to it all, let's put it that way. So it's weird. What I getting back to the episode of this thing of the alternates, like they go down these other routes. They're trying to use the CG the performer, and they're going to map a face over it. So this predicts sort of like deep fakes and all that sort of stuff. But they've got this. He wants the camera roving so that he can sort of see this thing. One of the things I was sort of I wanted to get to the sort of the nub of this, because the Prime Minister does do it. He eventually has sex with a pig, and you say this carries through, and it does sort of go through some of the consequences, but it ends with him like it's happened. She is returned, and you've sort of seen the public reaction. Like they're all sort of geared up for it. Hey, yeah, it's going to be amazing, a historical event. And then when it takes place, everyone is like revolted and like, oh my God, he's done it. And then it goes on for like an hour for, obvious reasons, like, the difficulty he has. And it's the fact that like no one seemed, they don't show people turning away. One of the things I was surprised about is it never shows another side to the public. Everyone's jumping on it. They're either down the pub, there's one in the hospital, there's that couple that are sat in bed and the guy's recording it, even though it's going to be made illegal to own a copy of this footage. There's no one, there's no character in this story saying, this is wrong, this is disgusting, I can't believe that you're watching this, I'm going to walk out, I can't watch this on moral grounds.
Right.
There's no one that's acting as that, almost a devil's advocate, I suppose. And I kind of find that bizarre. It's almost like he wants to show the bloodthirstiness of the crowd, really, but I think it's missing a character.
Yeah, it's that kind of like the end of that terrible, terrible, terrible movie Braveheart, where everybody's like, "Yeah, kill him," and then they're like, "Oh, this is too bloody for what I expected," and everybody has their same reaction.
Yeah.
But I think you're completely right. This is but it's of a piece with everybody being off the streets. Like everybody reacts the same way, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where this sort of the satire of this episode in particular starts to fall down, when it's sort of like we said about the naming of this series as being Black Mirror, like it's that thing on devices, but it's also very bleak. This has, and I find that this will be maybe a commentary throughout, is this has a very bleak outview outlook, I should say, sorry, of the world. I mean, I'm sure in Charlie Brooker must be an absolute thrill to have at dinner parties. but this is it.
You say this, but I don't think so. I mean, at least not in this episode, because the weird thing is that obviously, like, the public is bloodthirsty. I mean, there's so much about this episode that I don't understand, and obviously the sort of the denotus British authoritarianism, the idea that you can that easily pass a law saying it's illegal to have this footage, is also like, that should stop the episode right there. That's like a completely authoritarian, horrific moment. There are these things like that should just totally stop the episode and be the focus of the episode, that aren't, because it's in a British context. But then, in a weird way, this is such a utopian vision of a prime minister.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I don't understand how he gets erect and achieves orgasm, okay, which is required by I guess there are drugs or whatever.
He takes it, yeah. I mean, you see him take, I assume it's like a a blue pill, like a, what's it called, Viagra or something. But you're right, like this guy, this prime minister is seen to be almost as a hero, because a lot of the other characters are all vile people, and I'm with him because he's going, it's not going to happen, and then he sort of does it. He does it at the end, and he's and then he can't face his wife. And the one thing I want to see at the back of this is, because this is a historical event, like people will be talking about this for a long time. This will change.
Well, not in Britain, apparently.
Well, no, but this would. I mean, like, consider that this is a terrorist attack. All right, how do you protect future prime ministers from having to do this again?
Right.
How do you protect other people from having, from other people in authority from you? So the party that you didn't vote for gets into power, so you do an act like this. Okay, well, just because you don't like their policies, well, that's not really democracy. Do you know what I mean? Like, what was the repercussions of this? What happened to, Prime Minister Michael Carroll? Did he resign straight after it? Did his wife leave him? Did he commit suicide? Like, I almost feel like this needs like a, 12 months later epilogue.
Yeah, well, it does have a 12 months later epilogue, literally. It does have that epilogue where he they basically say like his polls are a little higher than they were a year ago,
Mm.
and it ends with him talking to his wife. His wife just ignores him and goes up the stairs. So, I mean, I kind of like the idea that the public just doesn't care, right? Like the public just moves on, and it's like, oh yeah, there was that silly thing with that pig. Um, so I kind of like that, but I'm also with you that like even if the public, if you follow polls don't tell you everything. And
No.
even if you could get a poll that said 75% of the public wants you to screw this pig, the truth is, once they watch you on camera screw that pig, they're
Yeah.
not going to feel the same about it, right? Um, they're not going to feel great about it. On the other hand, I mean, I think that you would have a complex set of reactions.
Mm.
Um, all of which would be sort of interesting and possibly more interesting than what we get. You're completely right. I mean, he capitulated. It's going to come out probably that she was released, 30 minutes early. Um, you know, and the other thing I don't understand about the ending, I sort of like that it's forgotten and nobody cares. Um, but I do sort of I am bothered by this rift between him and his wife. It is strange that he doesn't call his wife before doing it, and it seems as
Yeah.
if he's pressured by his people to do it, where they're like, "Look, the party wants you to do it, the crown wants you to do it, the people want you to do it." And I do think there are these moments as president or prime minister where you feel the weight of the office and you basically have to toughen up and do
Fuck a
something that
pig.
you probably yeah, well, fuck a pig, metaphorically,
Yeah.
right? I mean, send in the National Guard or, continue. I mean, I think one of the main ones is the way we get wars continued,
Yeah. Yeah.
where, when you have a room full of generals telling you, look, you have to do this, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Um,
Just take the tough decisions and follow through with the tough act, isn't it, really?
yes, you've
Um,
talked about this for months. Here are your options. They're so terrible on one side. You have to do this thing on the other. So I kind of like that moment, but I don't understand his relationship with his wife. That we never
yes.
follow up with the reporter. We never really follow up the wife. And I think with the wife, it's strange that he doesn't call her before doing it. And it's strange that she wouldn't 12 months later forgive him. Like, obviously, people have affairs all the time, right? He has screwed a pig on national TV. But
Yeah.
of all the embarrassing things, all of the strains of being married to the prime minister, surely this is not the worst one.
No, I mean, one of the things I think that's interesting is at this point in British history. I mean, I wonder about this guy. So, the Callow. I often think, like, is this David Cameron or is it
Mm.
Tony Blair? It's that thing. But one of the reasons that Tony Blair ended up sort of having to sort of leave office because we went to war in Iraq, obviously solved that thing with George W. Bush, was when it came out that weapons of mass destruction. Oh no, there isn't. And
Right.
they lied in a dossier of information, and so we've had sort of things of like disgraced prime ministers having done things, and been involved in corrupt acts and stuff. And you're right, we do sort of at first we're like, that's disgraceful, and then 10 years later we're like, yeah, maybe it wasn't so bad. It was crap at the time, but he had his good points and all this other stuff. So it's complex. And I understand, obviously, this has got budget restraints and time restraints and other pieces, but like one of the things that's interesting about this is I think it comes back to that thing we often say this about Doctor Who is I'm more interested. They do have those sort of public proxies, those characters in the public, but they don't. They're more just there to provide some sort of info dumps at times. They don't actually seem to. They don't convey like a public sense to me, like a public debate
Mm.
or a true representation of what I think the British public would do. They're more a bit of a, this would be gross kind of thing. It's more like a weird Greek chorus. It's I don't understand it.
Mm. No, that's a very good point. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I sort of feel as if um a sort of from the outside, I sort of feel as if there's a complaint being made here. Uh, maybe Blair, I don't know, maybe Brown, but certainly Cameron was kind of perceived as the, follow the polls, sort of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that sort of safe kind of guy who just, like
Well,
would fuck a pig if
yeah.
the polls indicated it.
Well, the suggestion was there was other animal based things in his university years, but that's a different
That's
story.
true, right?
Um,
I
which is
think that
why
came out after this, though.
it did, yeah, yeah. But again, like who knows what's known behind the scenes? But again, like, you're right. That's why I often think of Cameron in this role because of that willingness to shift with the will of the people a little bit. But he seems to
Mm,
fight against this. One thing I will say is, and this is the only time I think this has come up, like we in this country do like our, there's Armand Anucci did a program called The Thick of It, which had Peter Capaldi in, which is a fantastic character. If you think The Office, the original Office is sort of like awkward, go find The Thick of It with Peter Capaldi. It's wonderfully his use. The fact he became Doctor Who is amazing, considering how he started in this show, and the use of his vocabulary, the use of swear words is amazing. But we have similar things in that, like not to this extent, but this idea of the sort of the games that are played in politics and how sort of people are perceived and all that other stuff. But this made me think of, and again, this will be the only time I mention this, but I think with any of these shows, is Yes Minister. In fact, it was an episode of Yes Prime Minister. There's an episode of Yes Prime Minister where a little girl's dog gets stuck on a military artillery range somewhere in sort of like Surrey. And eventually, when the Prime Minister's like, well, we can't waste money on it, Prime Minister Hacker, and everyone's sort of against it. And eventually, because the public are so against him for not doing anything, he ends up rescuing this dog to basically distract from something else that's going on. But weirdly, the comeuppance of it is that it cost him a fortune to rescue this dog, and he's now got to confess the budget and all this other stuff. That to me, weirdly feels a little more on point with this thing of, like you said, the extremes of having to screw a pig, but like because of that extremeness on it, it seems a little bit silly. I don't know, it feels a bit silly. So because there's been other versions of this previously in both The Thick of It and Yes Prime Minister, like I feel a little bit, oh yeah, this is not, I've seen this before and it's been done better almost in a different way. Anyway, any last thoughts? We're coming to time. So any final thoughts for the national anthem?
No, I think this is a fair episode. It's an acceptable opening. It's interesting. Obviously, everyone remembers it. I like that they're going for it. I mean, I like that this is a sort of grenade lobbed into British culture.
Yeah.
It's not a very precise grenade. It's as grenades tend not to be. I mean, it's crude. It's crude not just because of the pig, but as a cultural commentary. It's not in control of itself, but it is willing to say, we're going to go there as a show. And I do really like that, even if I am less impressed with the episode.
Yes. No, I agree. As a pilot for what this is, a bit of a statement of intent, and as I say, a bit of a sort of to create that shock value, I think it works. It definitely got people on the hook to watch the rest of the series. And I do wonder if, because the next two episodes are a lot more science fiction based, if not only was this shocking, but this was almost like an easier pill to swallow to get a more mainstream audience in 2011. I don't know. That might I can imagine that being a discussion. Anyway, let's wrap up there. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Black Mirror. We've covered our first episode. Let us know what you think, especially of this first episode, or have you just jumped straight to the Netflix episode? Have you seen it at all? Is this a cutting satire of the British political system and its media infrastructure, or is it just a pile of tosh? Let us know. Please find us on at podtimespace, and contact us, or if you really like what we're doing, leave a review on any of your podcast catchers and check out our Patreon, www.patreon.com/20CG Media. There'll be a link down below. But yeah, okay, we will crack on. It will continue with season 1 of Black Mirror. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.